What is going on, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Wednesday Football Talk Show here with Ben Hall, my guy Trey Watson. In today's episode, we have an interview. We are bringing on Israel Mukuamu, the cornerback from South Carolina. It's a really good interview. We're doing an interview, and then we're going to talk some football too. So, before we get into all this, how you doing today, Trey?
Doing good, man. Like you said, excited to have someone on the show, talk a little draft process and what that's like for him, and then talk about the games. It's the end of the season, last week coming up. A lot of playoff implications still to be decided, and a lot of good stuff happening.
So my first question is, how's everything been going for you since deciding to opt out and stopping playing for South Carolina and moving on to get ready for the draft?
Everything's been going pretty good. Just been getting healthy and just getting ready to train. So I feel 100% now. So I'm ready to go and train.
So take me through what this season was like for you. I'm sure you've never ever had a season like this with COVID and all those protocols. So take me through what this season was like for you at South Carolina.
The season this year was a lot different. It was kind of rough. Just with me, going into my junior year, ready to just give it all I had. And, going into the first game, I had got hurt, strained my groin. And then I just been dealing with that all season. And then leading up to, I played in a couple of games. Some games I felt better than others, but I just really wasn't 100%. But then I got hurt again, the Ole Miss game, which was like, I think 3 games left in the season. And when I got re-injured, my MRI came back that I wasn't going to be back in time to finish the rest of the season anyway. So I went ahead and opted out.
So now, what was it like playing alongside Jaycee Horn? You guys were arguably one of the best cornerback duos in all of college football. So take me through what it was like, having two talented, you, yourself, and having another talented cornerback right next to you.
It was a blessing, just coming in out of high school, we both contacted each other, and then we just had the same mindset from day one, and that was just to be the best in the country and then get to this point. So I mean, it's good when you have somebody else that has the same goal as you and the same aspiration. So just working alongside with him and him being my best friend and us just working hard and accomplish things that we did was just a blessing.
So now, before going to South Carolina, you were rated a 3-star defensive back, and you were top 50 DB in the country. You had offers from a ton of schools: Indiana, Clemson, Georgia, Florida State. So why did you want to choose South Carolina to play football and continue your education there?
So originally, I played high school ball in South Carolina. So since my sophomore year in high school, South Carolina always been on me. But then once I moved to Louisiana my senior year of high school, and things kind of fell off, and I committed to Florida State. But as I committed to Florida State going into my senior year, Coach Muschamp, Coach T-Rob, they reached out to me that summer going into my senior year, and they just built a relationship with me and trying to just get me to come back to South Carolina. So, I was committed to Florida State. Then the whole incident with Jimbo leaving, I didn't feel comfortable going to play for a coach that I didn't know who was going to be the coach. So I finally committed to South Carolina, and they developed a lot of good DBs, Coach Muschamp, Coach T-Rob. So it was just the best opportunity for me.
So now, during your freshman year at South Carolina, you had a ton of play time, and you even got your first collegiate start as safety and then moved over to corner. And you started actually in the Belk Bowl against Virginia. So what was it like for you having such a huge impact on this team so early in your career?
I mean, it was a blessing, and that's why I came to South Carolina, because I knew I was going to have an opportunity to play early. So, I just took it all in, and I was able to start, and I made the most of it.
So now, during your sophomore season against Georgia, you made 11 tackles and had 3 interceptions against Jake Fromm, who hadn't even thrown a pick all year. And you got a ton of national media and stuff like that. Your Walter Camp National Defensive Player of the Week, Chuck Bednarik National Player of the Week. What was that week? What was the game like for you? And after that, what was the following week like?
The game was crazy. Stuff like that usually don't happen. But a lot of people don't know I was actually sick that game. That's the crazy part. But yeah, it was a blessing from God. But after the game, really, I didn't want to think too much of it because, just like as a DB, you got to have short memory because one game you could come out, catch 3 interceptions, and everybody tweets that you're the best. Then the next game you can give up 3 touchdowns and everybody say you're the worst. So you just got to keep a short memory and understand that, like, every game is a different game and every play is a different play.
So what was that whole sophomore season like for you? You were the all SEC second team. You had a really, really good year and really raised your, had a ton of media looking at you. Like, I'm sure you really raised your draft stock just by that sophomore year alone. So what was that season like for you as a whole?
It was a blessing. I knew I was going to come out and have a big year just because my freshman year, I didn't play as much defense as I wanted to because I was just playing special teams. So I just knew when I got the chance that I was going to make plays and make things happen. So it was just a blessing.
So now, throughout your college career, you showed a ton of versatility with your ability to play both corner and safety, which you started games at both positions. What does having that versatility mean to you? It can really help your draft stock for a lot of players. So what does having that versatility mean to you?
I mean, it's just something that God gave me. He gave me this talent. But I mean, it's good because I can be in different schemes. So I think that's one thing that's special about me and that's different than a lot of other DBs that a lot of coaches can use me in many different ways as far as guarding the tight end, guarding the receiver. So that's one thing I pride on, just being a whole DB.
So now my second to last question, throughout your college career at South Carolina, who was your favorite opponent to play against?
My favorite opponent to play against, I mean, I don't really have one. So I just like going into the game and competing every game. So
now my final question, what is something that you would want all NFL scouts, coaches, and GMs to know about you prior to the draft?
that I'm a hard worker. I'm gonna come in with my head down and work hard, and I just do what's best for the team. And if you want a worker and you want somebody that's gonna change the game and make plays, then that's me.
All right, now I'm gonna let Trey ask a few questions.
Yeah, man, I only have a couple. I remember going through the pre-draft process, and it's even more unique. The last 2 years with COVID going on and everything. So many different things are shut down, and you have to do so many different things. What is the one thing though that you're looking to convey? It's similar to what Ben just asked, but what do you want teams to know for sure about you? Whether it's through your combine workout, through your interviews, pro day, if y'all can even have those right now. What is the biggest thing that you want to get across to teams, scouts, GMs, coaches?
First and foremost, that I'm a great person. You're not gonna have any trouble with me outside off the field issues. And then second, that I'm a hard worker. I'm not really into the talking. I like to just lead by example by putting in the hard work. And third, that I'm versatile. I'm gonna do whatever the coach asks me to do, and I'm gonna make plays.
That's what's up, man. That's what's up. And building off that, you're gonna get asked this probably 100,000 times in the next couple of months, man. Because I know I was. What's the one thing during this pre-draft process that you want to make sure you work on the most with your game, whether it's related to your testing times, your individual workout? What's the one thing you want to see the most improvement out of yourself in?
Most definitely the 40. That's the question that's being asked around. So I just want to show people that I can run, and then after that, just go out there and ball and show people that it's just not all about running. It's also about technique as well.
No, I agreed 100%, man. I went through the same thing with my pre-draft process. Those are all my questions, man. I like to focus on football, man, and it seems like that's what you like to do too. So I can respect that.
Yeah, appreciate that.
So now for our first game of the week, the Saints Vikings on Christmas. The big takeaway from this game was Alvin Kamara, 6 touchdowns and 155 rushing yards. He tied the record. I would have liked to see Sean Payton let him score a touchdown late in that game. He pulled him out and brought in Taysom Hill, who ran it in. But that was when Kamara was at 5, and then Kamara came back in later after they got in the goal line, and Kamara got it in for a 6th. But it would have been cool to see him get 7, but it was still awesome seeing him play the way he did. The Saints offense is really starting to look a little bit more like last year. Drew Brees is still having some struggles. He threw 2 interceptions, but he threw for 311 yards. I know that's not much against a banged up Vikings defense. But to see Brees over 300 yards is really, really good for them at this point in the year. And for the Vikings, this game really did not mean much to them. Kirk Cousins threw for 291 yards. Dalvin Cook ran for, I think, 80 some yards. But like we've said before, this game was, they didn't want to win it. They want to get the draft pick. And for the Saints, it was a really good win just because they won by so much, and they had the offense going a little bit more.
Yeah, man, I think it was a big game for the Saints' confidence, heading into the playoffs. And they still have a chance to get the number 1 seed depending on what happens this week. But perfect time to do it just because it's, end of the season is here. Perfect time to just, prep little things, get guys back going, get Drew Brees back feeling confident again. And, then they'll end up having Michael Thomas back for the playoffs. But, Kamara did anything he wanted to. The Vikings basically played a bunch of random guys out there off the street because they had so many injuries and COVID cases and all those kinds of things. They had, all kind of guys coming in at linebacker, corner that hadn't played all year long and were playing the entire game really. But it was interesting that Sean Payton did that, with Kamara. I think coaches and players, they know when those type of situations are happening. And no one's going to complain if, hey, let the guy who's about to set a 100-year NFL record, break the record. Like, come on. The Taysom Hill wouldn't have complained if, that 1-yard touchdown goes to Kamara and then he ended up coming back in and getting the other one anyway. So that would have been 7. Guys get excited for that stuff even if it's not them. Like, they were a part of that moment. So I've never understood that. That happens a lot. Like, they'll pull guys and they're about to set a rushing yard record, or they're about to throw for, 600-700 yards in a college game, and coaches will pull them just, I don't know to say they pull them. I mean, if you're up by 100 points, then that's one thing. But, that game was actually, in question for most of it just because it was a close score. But, it's still cool that he tied the record. The record was set originally in 1920-something. And, he did it easily,
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also the big thing about that was kind of made me mad was Taysom Hill is a big part of your offense. So it wasn't like you were bringing in a backup because you didn't want someone to get hurt. You were still bringing in Taysom Hill, a guy who means something to your team. And with the way Kamara ran, he would have easily got 1 yard. But for our next game, the Bucs versus the Lions, this was a hard game to watch because it was just so bad. The Detroit Lions just looked terrible. And the Bucs, the Bucs offense, I think looked as best as it has all year. They were without Ronald Jones, who's still having I think he has a hand injury. But Tom Brady threw for 348 yards and 4 touchdowns in the first half and didn't even play at all in the second half, which is just insane. Mike Evans had 10 catches, 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. So I think we can kind of see what that offense will do when they get Mike Evans involved that much. But they got a ton of guys involved. Godwin had a touchdown. I think Antonio Brown had a touchdown too. But for the Bucs offense, Keyshawn Vaughn, the running back, he ran for 62 yards, and Leonard Fournette really couldn't get going. It wasn't like it was an issue for them just because the way they played, but Keyshawn Vaughn definitely showed something that they might be able to use him later on down the stretch when they're trying to make a playoff run. But for the Lions, my biggest takeaway, I know he fumbled, but I just think DeAndre Swift has to get used more. Early on in the game, he broke off 2 8 or 12-yard runs, and it was he didn't get the ball a lot after that. And then they kind of, after he had the fumble, forced him back into it. And to me, it just didn't make sense because I thought he was having his way running the ball. And usually when something's not broke, you don't try to fix it. And they kept trying to throw the ball with Stafford out, which did not make any sense. If Stafford's in that game, I understand throwing because I think Stafford's a good quarterback. But with Stafford out, I think you have to go to the run game. And DeAndre Swift had been having a few good weeks previously. So I really think they could have utilized him more.
Yeah, man, I think, that one was certainly tough to watch and really wasn't worth watching once the Bucs got going. But again, just like the Saints, the Bucs are getting going at the right time. They've been, extremely up and down all year long. But it's the right time to be in a groove. It's the right time for Brady to be finding all of his guys. And I mean, they need a second option at running back. All of those guys really. Fournette, McCoy's been extremely limited all year, and then even Keyshawn have been, very sporadic in their play so far this year. They tried to play Keyshawn against the Bears a little more. He, had a big fumble that cost them. I mean, I know him well, having played with him in Illinois. He's a beast of a running back. And he'll get going, maybe this week will help him out and he'll, earn their trust a little bit more and be that number 2 guy behind Rojo for him going into the playoffs. But the Bucs, they look like they're in a good position and, the Lions are ready to hit the offseason and figure things out.
So for our next game, the 49ers Cardinals, this was the second game of that Saturday. Jeff Wilson was the big guy in this game. He had 183 rushing yards, which I don't think anybody really expected. CJ Beathard had 182 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. George Kittle, coming back off injury, had a 92, I think, receiving yards. So it was kind of like their offense looked much better than I think everybody expected. And then on the other team, the Cardinals, they just really couldn't get anything going on offense. Kyler Murray really, really struggled. I don't think the stats really show it, but watching that game, Kyler Murray just could not get anything going. And every time they needed it, they just couldn't get it going. But for them, that's a really, really, really bad loss at home to a banged up 49ers team who, don't get me wrong, played really well, but the 49ers aren't competing for anything except maybe a draft pick. And the Cardinals, if they won that game, all they would have to do is win next week to make the playoffs. But now I'm pretty sure if the Bears went out, the Cardinals will get bounced out, which is very, very tough for the Cardinals. And the Cardinals got a tough game against the Rams next week. So it's not even like they got a guaranteed win, especially coming off the loss to the 49ers. So I just think overall, the biggest takeaway from this game was the Cardinals just couldn't find a way to get a much needed win. That team's very young. They got a young coach in Cliff Kingsbury, and it kind of makes sense. But at the same time, they have a lot of talent on that roster, and I think they should be making the playoffs. They're in a hard division, but they should be making the playoffs with the talent they have on that roster.
Yeah, for sure, man. The Cardinals just haven't looked like the same team really the second half of the season. They had a bad loss to the Patriots and just haven't been consistent really since that point. They didn't look like the same team, from the first half of the season when they had the crazy comeback win against the Bills, when they beat the Seahawks, and they just were playing a different level early on in the year. Injuries might have played a part in that, and maybe they figured the offense out a little bit, but they just don't look like the same team, and now they're in a really tough spot because that Rams-Cardinals game is going to be interesting with both quarterbacks, most likely not playing, and then a playoff spot being on the line for both of them. But it'll be even more tough, for the Cardinals without having Kyler Murray.
So now for our next game, the Dolphins versus the Raiders, watching this game was like, as I said before, like, I root for the Ravens, and the Ravens before Sunday, the Ravens needed the Raiders to win this game. And watching the game throughout the whole game, it's going well. And then at the end, the Raiders fall apart. And there were a lot of, I think, bad coaching mistakes. Like I've said before, these coaches know more than I do. However, it just didn't make much sense to me what they did. But we saw Fitzmagic. You definitely are familiar with it. You spent a training camp with him, so you definitely know how it goes. And he came in and just he got it done. It was a underneath pass to Myles Gaskin in the first one that went for a lot of yards, but he still had 182 yards and a touchdown in, I think, was one quarter. I'm pretty sure he came in. But yeah, the Raiders really, I thought, played well as a team, and they did everything they needed to win the game. Their defense definitely let them down at the end. That was terrible. But I still am quite confused why John Gruden, and if he did not have any chance of making the playoffs, I would have understood maybe just trying to run some clock and do whatever. But I've always said this, field goals are for losers. I'm not saying for losers, but kicking field goals, I don't think can just straight up win you a game. And we saw that they had the ball at the 1 yard line with a minute left. And instead of just running a touchdown in with Josh Jacobs, who got them down there, they decided to take a knee, run clock, and kick the field goal. And it wasn't even, they didn't even line up on the inside. They lined up on the left hash, so they didn't even center it. But I mean, that might be just how the kicker likes it. I'm not exactly sure. But this whole game to me just was insane. Nelson Aguilar had a great game for the Raiders. He had 155 yards and a touchdown. But like I said before, the Dolphins definitely, I think, are going to get into the playoffs now. They got a tough game against the Bills next week. But even with the loss, I still think like it would have to be a bunch of other stuff to have a bunch of other stuff would have to happen for them to get bounced out. So it was a good win for them. And I didn't even state, I thought Tua, I didn't really think he played that bad, but that team definitely needed a spark what Ryan Fitzpatrick gave them. But they're saying Tua is going to start next week. So it'll be good to see Tua back. But Fitzpatrick just had one of his magic games.
Yeah, man, I think, that's just been his element, really most of his career. When he comes off the bench, exciting things are, bound to happen. And that's exactly what happened for him. And like you said, it was the spark they needed. And, as it turned out, they won the game, and it ended up being a great, coaching adjustment by Coach Flores and the Dolphins. But at the same time, it was, really poor adjusting by the Raiders. When Fitzpatrick came in the game, the Dolphins at that point, they didn't look nearly as dynamic on offense. And they hadn't really been stretching the ball down the field. That's part of the reason they put Ryan in. And you know those things are coming. You know what type of quarterback Fitzpatrick is. They didn't bring him in there, because they didn't like how Tua was handing the ball off, So to not, be more prepared for the vertical passing game and, let that be what beats you hurts, especially when, like you said, Nelson Aguilar had another great game. He's been playing great all year for the most part. And they have, the second best and most athletic tight end in the NFL right now, and Darren Waller, who was unstoppable all game. But really, ultimately, it just came down, like you said, the settling for field goals hurt him, and then just really poor pass defense, let the Dolphins take advantage, and ultimately they did what they needed to do.
So now for our first game on Sunday, the Chiefs-Falcons, this was a bit of a surprise just because I definitely was expecting the Chiefs to handle the Falcons a lot better. Mahomes did not have a expected game. He threw for 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. But like, it's crazy. A 278-yard passing day is like bad for him just because he's so good. But their offense just did not look as good. Like, their passing game couldn't get going. The run game really couldn't get going. And the Falcons defense really, really played well, which really surprised me. I thought coming off of the Chiefs game last week, the Chiefs were going to come out and really, really put it to the Falcons, but the Falcons stuck around. Calvin Ridley and Matt Ryan really, really played well together. Ryan had 300 passing yards and a touchdown. Calvin Ridley had 5 catches for 130 yards. But yeah, like I said, the Falcons couldn't figure a way to punch it in. They kicked some field goals, and Q at the end, he missed his first. As soon as the people put it on the TV, like it always goes, they said he had made a ton consecutively, and then he went out and missed it. So and I also think he kicked one earlier maybe, but like it was just a low scoring game. And with the Chiefs, when teams compete with them, it's really, really high scoring usually. So it was just a really, really big surprise overall, just because I really thought Patrick Mahomes was going to have his way against that defense.
Yeah, man, I think it was definitely a surprise overall. But at the end of the day, what the Chiefs have shown is that it doesn't matter, who they're playing, what the situation is, how many points they're down. They're liable to come back at any time and to really take over a game in an instant. And at the end of the day, I mean, they made enough plays to win. The Falcons had a chance to close out, man. I mean, AJ Terrell had an easy interception that he, has to make that play. First of all, you're any level corner, you expect to make that play, but you're a first round draft pick, starting in a big game like that, you just got to have that play. So that one hurts, and the Chiefs turned around and took advantage and won the game. And it hurts for Younghoe Koo, man, because I mean everyone kind of is learning about him and his story this year. And coming off of being cut multiple times, leading the league in scoring, and being a Pro Bowl kicker and being consistent all year long. To have that be your one blip, in a game that the team for sure wanted to win. In the end, it worked because they keep their draft pick, as high as possible. So I know on the flip side, the general manager and the fans aren't really complaining. But it just hurts for him just because how, what he's been going through and how good he's been playing all year.
Yeah, and before we get into the next game, Young Ho Koo, we really, really slander kickers on here because we need to with the way they played this year. But like you said, Koo has been so good. And as you said, that him missing that kick definitely saved him a draft pick. So, I haven't seen anywhere, but if somebody is slandering him, you really can't just with the year he's had because he's been automatic all year. But it was definitely a tough kick there in Kansas City with a ton of wind. But for our next game, the Browns Jets, this was the surprise of the week, I guess, just because of the outcome. But the Browns were without 3 or 4 wide receivers, I think, and a starting linebacker in Jacob Phillips. So it was tough for them. But it didn't really make sense to me the way they used Chubb. He only had 28 rushing yards and a touchdown, but I thought they would definitely give him the ball a lot more. Now, I know the Jets definitely had a lot of guys in the box just because they weren't expecting the pass because the Browns really did not have any receivers healthy because of the COVID rules, but I just didn't understand why they didn't go to Chubb more. But for the Jets, Sam Darnold threw for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, Jamison Crowder was played a huge part in winning this game for them. He had 92 receiving yards and a touchdown, and he also had a passing touchdown, which was probably the longest pass of the day because Darnold really wasn't airing it out too much. But watching this game throughout the whole game, I really thought the Browns were going to get back into it. And then they went down so many, and then I thought it was over. And the Browns battled back, and then just couldn't get it in on their final drive. I think they turned it over. So the Browns, with a win against the Steelers, who are now starting Mason Rudolph, which just came out earlier, should get into the playoffs, but it would be like the Browns to have a winning record, treat it like you won the Super Bowl, like all their fans and their team did, and then not get into the playoffs. So we'll see, but they got to beat the Steelers, but it shouldn't be too tough to beat Mason Rudolph.
Yeah, man, it's definitely tough for that to happen, to the Browns after, basically this whole year has been them outperforming expectations. The COVID cases hurt, and I mean, that's your starting receivers, the day before the game. That's hard to overcome. But at the end of the day, the gap between the Browns and the Jets in 2020 should have been plenty enough to compensate for losing those players. You still have a number 1 overall pick at quarterback. You still have 2 really good running backs, and you're supposed to have a solid defense to fall back on. Led by Myles Garrett. You expect to be able to win those games, and with their fate not entirely sealed in the playoffs, you expect them to handle that, and they just didn't step up to the plate. But people say all the time, man, on any given Sunday, anything can happen. That's just professional football. All those guys get paid, and the Jets finally decided to wake up, but it was at the expense of the number 1 pick. So it is what it is for them.
So now for our next game, the Ravens versus Giants. Like I've said in previous weeks, and we've talked about, the Ravens offense is really starting to play well. But now, granted, they've had some injuries on defense, but their defense, as their offense has improved, it seems like their defense is really starting to struggle. Now the Giants were never really a threat to beating the Ravens this week, but it was just like the defense just allowed way too many passing yards. Now they have Marcus Peters and Jimmy Smith out with injuries, and I think they would have played in a playoff game or a bigger game, but I think they're trying to give those guys rest. But for the offense, Lamar played really well. He had 183 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, and 80 rushing yards. Now, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards both ran for 75 plus yards, and Dobbins had a touchdown. And to me, that has just been the difference in their recent games. Now, they have been playing some bad opponents, but getting that run game established opens everything up for them, and I think that's what they need to do, especially in the playoff game. Last year against the Titans, we saw them kind of abandon the run, and that put them away, and then they tried to force passes late, and that's not the Ravens offense. But Lamar thrives when teams guess run because he can make plays. So I think you need to show run and let Lamar get outside, make a throw, because Lamar can throw the ball. Just when teams are always knowing the pass is coming, like any team, you're going to stop that. And I think they've struggled with that this year, but I think in this game we saw them get the run going early, and that opened up the passing game as the game went on. So, like I said, I think the Ravens are really starting to improve on offense, and it's starting to look closer to last year's. But on defense, they definitely have to get healthy and start playing a little bit better.
Yeah, man. The Ravens are looking better at the right time on offense. That was a potential letdown game for them just because they're still on the fringe of playoffs, and they needed a couple wins, and they need some other things to happen to get what they want. But they continue to look good, like you said. Lamar looks confident. Hollywood Brown is gaining confidence, and the running game is going right along with it. So, that can be what carries them, this last week of the season and into the playoffs, if everything goes right. And I mean, they'll work on the defense. Hopefully, they'll get guys back and be healthy and look like the defense that they have look like at times, which is pretty dominant, especially in the secondary. But they're offensively, that's what's going to be the difference for them, moving forward if they're able to get to the playoffs.
So now for our next game, the Colts Steelers. Anybody who watched this game at one point probably was 100% sure the Colts would win. In the first half, the Steelers just looked like we've seen them in the past few weeks. Ben Roethlisberger was really struggling early. The whole offense was struggling. They really couldn't figure anything out. They had a lot of short, like third and shorts or second and shorts, and they could not get the first down. They would run it. Benny Snell wouldn't get anything. James Conner wouldn't get anything. So they really couldn't get anything out of their offense. And meanwhile, the Colts offense, Jonathan Taylor's running all over them in the first half. And then all of a sudden in the second half, it was like the switch just flipped. And the Steelers also ended up winning, but they had first and goal from the 2 and weren't able to get it in early on in the third quarter. And after watching that, I thought the game was over. But Ben Roethlisberger really stepped up when the Steelers needed him to. He played great throughout the second half. I think one of the Colts a player in their starting secondary went down with an injury, and I heard that's what changed the game. But it was good for the Steelers to get Juju involved more. He's been dealing with a lot of stuff outside of football, and we haven't really seen him improve it all through all this. It's been like 20, 30 yards a game, which is just not like him. But on Sunday, he had 9 catches for 96 yards and a touchdown. So if the Steelers can get him going with Deontay Johnson, if he can limit the drops and continue to play how he has, I think that Steelers team could slowly get back to what they were at one point. Now, they still, they pulled this game out against the Colts, but all year to me, the Colts have been a first half team and have not been able to hold on to leads in the second half. I still question why Jonathan Taylor didn't have as many carries in the second half, just because to me, it seemed obvious that the Steelers really could not stop him early on. So the Colts now are looking into the playoffs from the outside, but there's a lot of competitive games this week that they could possibly slip in and get that last spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, man, it's a tough one for the Colts just because, like you said, it looked like they had it in the bag, and we were seeing the Steelers that we've seen, since this losing streak started, and I was convinced it was going to continue, and they were just going to, blow their season up. But they were able to really just save the day and change their prospects a lot because, they showed vertical passing game, which they hadn't shown in a long time. And it's been a huge part of their issues. Like you said, got Juju involved and hopefully gave him some confidence, to keep it going. But it remains to be seen, man. It'll, if Rudolph's playing against the Browns, that's something to watch. And if they can, keep guys healthy and keep it going into the playoffs. But it's definitely one that hurts for the Colts, and the Steelers kind of, like I said, saved themselves at the right time.
So now for our next game, the Bears versus the Jaguars. I've slowly built up to this throughout the past few episodes where the Bears are playing better than what we've said in the past, but I'm going to stick by our words. The Bears are still not a great football team. They because of the Cardinals' loss, they might slip into the playoffs. And if any Bears fans watch this, we'll be happy. But let's be real, that team is not going to win a game in the playoffs. But for this game, Trubisky played pretty well. He threw for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns with 1 interception. Like I said last week, I think he's been the difference in their success lately, just because I think he's given them a little bit of a spark. But more importantly, David Montgomery has just changed change that team's offense. This week he had 95 yards and a touchdown. Allen Robinson had 10 catches for 103 yards. So the Jags secured the first overall pick, and I think that kind of played part in Glennon starting over Gardner Minshew. But like I said, I just think the Bears now, will they beat the Packers this week? I don't think so, but if somehow, some way they can pull off that upset, the Bears will be in the playoffs. And at one point, I would have bet everything I had they wouldn't be. But lastly, Allen Robinson this offseason, I think he's earned whoever signs him is going to pay him a ton of money, and I think he's earned all of it. I feel really, really bad for him just with what he's had to deal with. I think Trubisky's done a little bit better of a job getting him the ball, but it's just like I was watching some of his film from following Sunday's game and a few weeks before, and it just seems like he gets open with ease, and he doesn't really always get the ball. So I think wherever or whoever signs him is going to have to pay him a ton of money, which he deserves all of it. And yeah, I think he could be one of the bigger signings this free agency.
Yeah, man, I think, Allen Robinson has proven himself to be a capable number one receiver, and someone who can dominate, given the right amount of targets and looks. And between him and David Montgomery's, surging success this second half of the season, that's definitely changed how their offense looks and has given them a chance at the playoffs. I don't like them against the Packers unless the Packers rest a bunch of guys, which, maybe they could do, but I'm sure they want that only bye, pretty bad, because there's a way that they could end up not getting it if they lose and some other things happen. But, the fact that they even have a chance to get in the playoffs for Chicago is big for them, given everything that they've gone through this year. Change your quarterback, change it back, averaging like 30 rushing yards a game at one point. But the defense has been consistent for them throughout and gives them a chance. And when they get Robinson involved and when they get the run game going, they can do just enough.
So now for our next game, the Bengals Texans, it was when you watch Red Zone, like anytime they flip onto this, it's kind of boring just because neither team is playing for anything. But Brandon Allen for the Bengals, I didn't even know he was starting. I thought it was Ryan Finley. Ryan Finley didn't play. I'm not sure if that's because of injury or what. But Brandon Allen threw for 371 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was just bizarre to me because watching that game against the Steelers with Ryan Finley playing, it seemed like they were going to have to rely on the run if they were going to win another game this year. But him throwing for 371 yards and 2 touchdowns was just crazy. But it's good for them just because Brandon Allen is nowhere near as good as is nowhere near as good as Joe Burrow will be. So when Burrow comes back into this offense, they have a lot of hope. I'm hoping they kind of build the offensive line and maybe add some defensive pieces, but that offense could be really good. T. Higgins had 99 yards and 1 touchdown. Samaje Perine had 95 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, which is pretty crazy to see. And then on the other team for the Texans, Deshaun Watson, I've stated it all year, needs to get help. They don't have a first round pick, which would be perfect for them this year because this is such a deep or such a good offensive line draft. And I think they could take an offensive lineman if they had that pick, but they traded it for Tunsil and Kenny Stills, I think. So for them, it's nothing they can do anymore because they got both of the guys who made those decisions, or they got the guy who made those decisions out of there. But it's just tough for Texans fans right now is the least to say. Watson's giving them some hope just because he can get it done with literally anybody. He had Brandon Cooks catch 141 receiving yards and a touchdown. And David Johnson had a pretty good week. But like I said, Deshaun Watson is just so good. And I think if he had a talented roster, like a team like what Mahomes has, or something like that, I think he really, really would be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He already is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but he would be arguably the best if he had some talent just because he can make so many plays. And he almost got hurt on Sunday. So it was good to see. I don't think it's any serious injuries, thank God, but we'll see moving forward if they can get him some help.
Yeah, man, I think, it's been interesting to watch the Bengals all year just because, I think they showed flashes of being, capable of good things in the future with Joe Burrow there. certainly on offense, they have some skilled players. They've been missing their, number one running back almost all year long, and still found a way to have some success. And then they had a lot of success against Houston. Now, part of that's probably because Houston, isn't in the best shape right now. They don't look like the Houston team we've seen the last couple of years. But there's hope for Cincinnati. They'll get some more draft picks, like you said. T. Higgins looks really good. He's been one of the best rookie receivers, this season. They'll get Joe Burrow back eventually, and they'll keep building a team. They got solid young pieces on both sides of the ball. But Houston is got to figure things out. Don't know what exactly they'll be able to even do. Probably going to need to just rearrange the roster, maybe get some picks back. I don't know exactly where they'd get them, just because all their capable players are tied up in big deals, and I don't think they'd be trading those anytime soon. So they're in a tough spot overall, but it's definitely been tough to watch. Them not look like the same team at all this year.
So now for our next game, the Broncos versus Chargers. This was similar to the last game where it's like both teams really not playing for anything but a draft pick. But Herbert played pretty well. He had 253 passing yards and a touchdown. Drew Lock struggled a bit. He had 2 interceptions, and that's kind of hurt him all year. But this was like a defensive game overall. Melvin Gordon played against his former team, and he had 79 rushing yards, which was pretty good for him. But just overall, like I said, it was a defensive game. And the one thing that stood out to me for the Chargers, Kenneth Murray, their first-round pick, played really, really well. He had 10 tackles. And, investing in a guy like him, he was one of the best linebackers standing out to me in that draft. So I think if Murray can have some talent, when they get Derwin James back from injury, over the next few years, that Chargers team really, really could be a good team. They just need to kind of stay healthy and figure some things out in their organization as a whole. But like I said, over the next few years, I think that Chargers team could be a really, really good team.
Yeah, man, I think, they've got plenty of good pieces. Obviously, missing a guy like Derwin James all year is really tough. And they hope that, they can kind of get rid of the injury issue with him. But, they found a young quarterback who's really good in Herbert. They've got solid running back in Eckler and, one of the best receivers in the league in Keenan Allen. So they have a lot of really good pieces. They'll have to figure out ways to just, take it to the next level and, like you said, keep guys healthy. But for the Broncos and for Drew Lock, really, he just struggled with accuracy issues. It's kind of been his thing all year long, and really into last year once he started playing, because he's got some solid young weapons. Jerry Jeudy hasn't been getting really hardly any targets the last couple of weeks of the year, which is crazy, just knowing, how talented he is as a receiver and seeing some of the flash plays he made early in the season. But like they've got big, fast tight ends. He struggled to get them the ball, and they just as an offense have been up and down all year long. So they'll have to figure out what they're going to do moving forward and see if is Lock the answer or do they go in a different direction.
So now for our next game, the Panthers versus the Washington football team. This was a big surprise for me. I really, really thought the Washington football team would win this game. As I've stated before on the show, I really think Haskins is better than we've seen. Like I said, I like Haskins better than any quarterback they have there. Following this week, he was cut or released. And there's been a lot of like statements about his maturity and stuff like that. Now, I'm not in that locker room, so I can't really have any statements on that or have any feelings about that because I really just don't know. Nor would I ever judge him. I think Haskins, wherever he goes next. Now, I see a lot of people saying his career's over, blah, blah, blah. One, to me, he hasn't played well, but he played like 6 games in college. And on top of that, had really kind of got forced into a starting job and really has not had, I don't think, enough time to show himself. But I think the reason they're going from him so early is just because of the maturity, which I can't speak on. But I think wherever he goes next, he could, if it's the right system for him with his arm talent, I think he could be a good quarterback in the NFL. But I don't know if he'll get that opportunity or what will happen. But overall for this game, the Panthers, it really surprised me that the Panthers were able to pull off this upset, especially with them being out of the playoffs. with Antonio Gibson back, I really thought that was going to give that football team the spark that they needed. And it just, he had like 61 rushing yards, but they needed that game badly. Now this week is a must win. I'm guessing Taylor Heineke is going to be playing quarterback. But it might be Alex Smith if he's back from injury. I'm not exactly sure. But that loss for them is just very, very gut-wrenching for their fans. And now going on to next week, you have a must-win game against the Eagles, who before this past week have been looking like a really, really good football team.
Yeah, man, I think it's tough for the Washington just because they've had multiple chances to close it out. They did what they needed to do, in that probably third quarter of the season, and put themselves in a position to win the division, and then have two really let down games in a row. This one being really, really bad. And it sucks to see what's going on with Dwayne, just because I think he's he looked like a good football player when he was at O State. And I feel like he should be plenty capable, but can't do anything about someone else's decisions, man. And it doesn't seem like he's made some of the best ones, and just the on-field production hasn't been there. And when you couple those things together, you just you set yourself up for trouble. So it's changed the trajectory of his career, and he'll have to do a lot of work within himself and on the field to earn another opportunity to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. But, hope the best for him there. And, Carolina took advantage. They didn't really gain anything from winning this game, but they took advantage of a lot of bad plays in special teams and Washington not being good on offense to win the game. They just don't get a whole lot out of it.
So for our next game, the Cowboys versus Eagles, like I could not believe the Eagles lost this one. With the way Jalen Hurts has given that team a spark, I really thought they would beat the Cowboys and keep their playoff hopes alive. But Hurts threw for 342 yards and a touchdown and 2 interceptions, which were bad passes. But a rookie quarterback is going to make bad passes, make bad decisions. But the biggest thing for me was the way the Eagles defense played. Andy Dalton threw for 377 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he had 1 interception. And Ezekiel Elliott has had one of his best games of this year with 105 rushing yards. And Michael Gallup also had 6 catches for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. So for Cowboys fans, without Dak, I think this was a good sign just because it showed they can win games. And it showed they have so much talent on their offense. And Andy Dalton surprisingly really got it done with that offense. But looking forward for the Eagles, it was just a tough loss, given the fact with the way they've played and they somehow still had a chance of making the playoffs. They just couldn't pull this win off. But yeah, I think the defense definitely let that team down.
Yeah, I think, part of that, we talked about the Vikings earlier playing random guys out of necessity. The Eagles played Jalen Mills as their number 1 DB, and I'm pretty sure normally he's like the 3rd or 4th option. Just in terms of, guys that they have out there on a consistent basis. So that makes it tough. And Cowboys finally took advantage with, the weapons they have at receiver and Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Michael Gallup. They all made plays. Andy Dalton looked a lot more comfortable. And, the Cowboys mathematically are still in the race for the division, which is insane to even think about, given how they looked at one point in the year. But I still feel like Jalen Hurts definitely gives the Eagles the best chance to win. The picks were bad just because they were, they took points off the board for him, which hurts, especially in a big game like that. And there were just some missed opportunities there to take advantage and beat the Cowboys. But I mean, now we're set up for a big game at the end of the year with a lot on the line for all those teams, and it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So now for our next game, the Rams Seahawks. I guess with the way the Seahawks played against the Rams defense was kind of expected, just because the Rams defense is always given the Seahawks problems because that Rams defense is so good. But Russell Wilson threw for 225 yards and a touchdown. He didn't play bad, but he just hasn't played like he was earlier in the year, when I really thought at one point there was no doubt he was going to win the MVP. And now I think Rodgers is in that boat. But yeah, the Seahawks were able to get the win, which I thought would happen. But the Seahawks just have not, and it's mainly because of their defense, just have not been as good of a team as the record shows. They lost to the Giants, and that was the point for me where I was really starting to realize the Seahawks weren't as good as I thought they were. But for the Rams, they at one point were 2 weeks ago before the Jets game were playing like one of the hottest teams in football, and now lost back-to-back, one to the Jets and one to a tough divisional opponent in the Seahawks. So looking forward for the Rams, Goff now has a broken or hurt finger and is probably going to be out this week. So it's tough for them overall, but they're going to need their defense to really, really step it up this week against a good Cardinals team. So I don't know if we'll see that, but they need to, because with taking Goff out, the quarterback, I can't think of his name right now, but he hadn't played in a game in a while. I don't think he played in the XFL. I think he played in the AFL. I believe he might have played in the XFL as well, but that offense has a lot of weapons, and I think they need Cam Akers healthy if they're going to have some success, because that when Cam Akers is running the ball for them, that run game really, really looks great. But when he's not on the field, Darrell Henderson, Malcolm Brown, those guys I don't think are as explosive as Cam Akers. So we'll see how they do down the stretch, but I think they'll definitely need Goff back to have a little bit more of a chance at winning a playoff game.
Yeah, man, it's going to be tough for them just because, talked about it earlier, that they're playing the Cardinals and both teams aren't going to have their guys. And the game, is a must win for both of them really to lock those playoff spots up. So that'll be tough. But, the Rams just had two disappointing ones in a row. Obviously, the Seahawks loss isn't as bad as losing to the Jets. But the Seahawks did enough, man. I thought the game was really slow watching it from what I did see for a while. And it picked up towards the end. But like you said, Russell Wilson just isn't looking as dynamic as he was early on the season. DK made a couple plays, and I think, he broke some record for Seahawks receiving. But, both times they played the Rams, Jalen Ramsey kind of limited him from doing anything that stood out the way, DK has throughout this season. And that, that's part of the reason the Seahawks offense probably didn't look as dynamic. But, they'll need to get going. They've been getting more out of the running game, and that helped them a lot to close that game out, along with the one last week as well. But both teams, have a lot going forward. The Seahawks obviously locked up the division, so that's the big part for them. Now it's time for them to, tune up and get ready for the playoffs.
For our next game, the Titans versus Packers, like Aaron Rodgers has just played so well, and he threw for 231 yards and 4 touchdowns with 1 interception, which was his worst pass of the night. But other than that, he really didn't make too many mistakes. In a snowy game like this, I just did not ever see that happening. I thought both teams were going to run all over the other, and whoever could score more rushing touchdown will win the game. But the Packers come out throwing it, and Devontae Adams just continues to dominate whoever he's put up against. He had 11 catches for 142 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then the running game, like I said earlier in the year, I think they're limiting Aaron Jones because this is his free agency this year, and I don't think they'll be able to afford him. So I don't know if they're trying to get some momentum going with other guys and get some other guys used to it. But we just haven't seen much of Aaron Jones running the ball. But A.J. Dillon, the rookie from Boston College, ran for 124 yards and 2 touchdowns, which was just bizarre to me because, like, the Packers against the Titans, now the Packers had played above mediocre against in the past few weeks against some lower teams, but then they play against a Titans team who's pretty hot and who's been pretty good this year and played really, really well. At no point in this game for Packers fans was it a question whether they would win after the first 2 drives, just because you could tell by the way the game was going, the Packers were in full control. And for the Titans, to me, it did not make sense. Like I've stated this in multiple of their losses this year, the way they just did not get Derrick Henry more carries. Now, early on in the game, they would run him twice, and then it would be 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 4, and they would have to throw it. But once they went down 19-0, they just kind of stopped running the ball as a whole, just because they were buried. But the only way that team has success in the passing game is by Derrick Henry running the ball. And in that snow and how much snow was on the field, which was crazy, I think you have to get Derrick Henry the ball more, because Derrick Henry he's your franchise player right there. And we all know what Derrick Henry can do. But yeah, like I said, the Packers just dominated the Titans, and I think it was too late to get Derrick Henry going when they wanted to because they had to throw the ball so much.
Yeah, man, I think, the Packers came out and they made a statement. Devontae Adams has been unstoppable all year long. He continued that, and did whatever he wanted to do. AJ Dillon was definitely a surprise to see him impact the game like that. When they have Aaron Jones, maybe it is the contract situation, like you said, but that's been an interesting development. But I mean, for them to get AJ Dillon confident going into the playoffs and now have, a legitimate power back along with, Aaron Jones, who can really do it all, and the receivers and tight ends they've got right now, their offense just looks, invincible. And the Titans just failed to really step up in a game that was, a lot of pressure for them. Obviously, it was the night game and against a really good team. They just, failed to step up to the challenge this time.
So for our last game of the week, the Bills Patriots, this was everything we expected. Um, with the Bills, the way they play lately is one of the best in the NFL. And the Patriots just have really struggled, and we saw that once again on Monday night. Josh Allen threw for 320 yards and 4 touchdowns. Diggs had 9 catches, 145 yards, and 3 of those touchdowns. So, like, this year, I still believe DeAndre Hopkins is the best receiver in the league. But Devontae Adams and Stephon Diggs are definitely up there. After the year that both those guys have had, and the fact that Stephon Diggs went to Maryland, I think puts him above Hopkins. But Diggs has just literally changed that offense in every way. Last year, the Bills were good, but they weren't as good as they are now. Josh Allen was having some overthrown problems. He had John Brown and Cole Beasley, but Beasley's always thrived. When he has another really good receiver next to him, Beasley has always thrived. And adding Diggs just has changed that completely. And Diggs is making plays. Like Stephon Diggs has really, really played. Him and Devontae Adams have played like the best wide receivers this year, and that's not even a question. But then they had Zach Moss. He ran for 57 yards and a touchdown. So overall, I think that whole Bills team is really playing like the way they need to at this point in the year. I'm not sure what they're going to do this week with the Steelers benching Ben Roethlisberger this week to give him some rest for the playoffs. I could maybe see the Bills doing that, but I think the Bills want that 2 seed because I think both teams have the same record. And if the Steelers were to win, the Bills were to lose, Steelers would have the 2, and the Bills will then be the 3. But I don't think that will happen. And the Bills have a tough opponent in the Dolphins this week. So with the way that the Bills are playing right now, they're one of the toughest teams to play in the playoffs, and they're definitely a scary team. Now for the Patriots, before we move on, Cam Newton has really, really struggled. I've stated how much I like Cam before, but he's just not the same. And ever since the COVID injury or COVID being put on the COVID list, has not been the same quarterback he was. So I'm not sure what they're going to do moving on to next year, but they really, really need Cam to step up next year if they're going to make a AFC East run or even make the playoffs next year.
Yeah, man, I think right now the Bills are, looking like a complete football team. They're absolutely a threat to anyone that they come across in the playoffs right now, just because they have a running game going. Josh Allen is feeling extremely confident. He's got a, legitimate top 5 receiver in the league in Diggs, and Cole Beasley has been dominant from the slot all year long. And their defense looks a lot better than they did early on in the year. When they were having some up and down performances. But they look like a complete team. They're extremely confident. And they're in prime position to make some noise this year in the playoffs. It's been a tough year for the Patriots, and with everything, with Tom Brady leaving and it being Bill Belichick's first year essentially like alone, that's all anyone's talked about. Cam's been hard to watch just because, his play has been down so bad besides a couple early games in the season. You talk about the weapons he has or doesn't have really. And really their whole team, they had 2 or 3 defensive captains opt out before the season even started. They've had so many different things going on. But I foresee this being an off season where a lot of changes are made there. Roster changes, coaching changes, which isn't, a normal sign for a Patriots team, but it's probably something that needs to happen if they're going to talk about competing, because Miami is a much better team now, and look like they're built to sustain that, and the Bills have everything they need to be dominant for a while as well.
So now that we get into our picks, it's official that you beat me in the NFL picks. After last week, you're beating me 41-34, and there's no possible way I can catch up to you. We'll do a college pick later, but for the NFL, like I said, you're winning 41-34, and depending on what this week, it'll just be by how many points you win by. But our first game will be the Bills-Dolphins. I'm going to go with the Bills for every reason I just stated. I think the Bills are playing so good. If the Bills end up benching guys, I think the Dolphins will win because the Dolphins really need this win to get into the playoffs. So depending on if the Bills start all their guys that are healthy, I think the Bills will win. But if the Bills end up benching guys to give them rest, which I don't think will happen, I have to pick the Dolphins just because taking Josh Allen away would definitely hurt that team.
Yeah, man, I think it's going to be a really good game. Like you said, as long as everyone's playing. It's definitely going to be different than the first one we saw earlier this season where, the Bills kind of did whatever they wanted to in Miami. But I'm going to go with the Bills too, just because I feel like they've got it going at the right time. It'll be interesting to see what that does to the Dolphins' playoff chances. There's all those teams, stuck at 10-5. There's ways for them to get in even with a loss, which I probably see happening. But I just think the Bills look too good right now.
So now for the Steelers-Browns, when I had made the list, I took the Steelers before knowing that they were benching Ben Roethlisberger. So now I'm going to go with the Browns. I just don't see the Steelers. Now, I'm pretty sure, I'm almost positive that all the Browns' weapons will be back, which will be good for Baker, has struggled. But I just think that benching Ben Roethlisberger and putting Mason Rudolph. Now, this is a big rivalry. So for lots of reasons, most importantly last year, the whole helmet incident. So I think we'll see a really, really good game. And it's kind of ironic that Mason Rudolph's actually going to be starting this game because we know what happened the last time he played against the Browns team. So I think the Browns really will win this game because right now the Browns are sitting in the playoffs, and with a loss, they're kind of like the Dolphins where they could be bounced out, they could not. It all depends on what happens with the Colts and other teams. So I definitely have the Browns winning this game just because Ben Roethlisberger will be sitting out.
Yeah, man, I agree 100%. Bad as the Steelers have played last couple weeks with Mason Rudolph at the helm, I have even less confidence in them. So I think the Browns will take it. I didn't even think about the fact that, a year ago, all that craziness happened and it's the same game. And, of course, Mason Rudolph is back for that. So we'll see how that goes. If anything, I predict Myles Garrett just, makes him forget about it by having a 3-4 sack game, forced fumbles, on and on. And they, probably dominated and win it relatively easily.
So now for our next game, the Cardinals versus Rams. I'm going to go with the Cardinals. This one's a really tough one, but with the Cardinals sitting on the edge, I just think it'll give the guys a little bit more of a needed spark. Like you said, Murray's out, so it'll really be tough for them. But I think they're going to utilize their weapons well, and I think, like I said, this is a must-win game for them. So I think they'll get the win and take down a great Rams defense. But with Jared Goff out, I'm going to take the Cardinals.
Yeah, I think with both quarterbacks out, it's a toss-up. But I'm going to take the Cardinals too. I feel like, their backup will know he needs to force the ball to DeAndre Hopkins as much as possible. And that's probably what we'll see. He'll probably have, 12 to 15 targets or more. And if they lose going out that way, then, they'll have to be okay with it. But that's the only way that I can see them winning. And that's kind of what I see happening.
So now for our second to last game, the Packers-Bears. I'm going with the Packers. As long as they start other starters, I don't even have to explain this one. I've already explained it in previous weeks. So I'm going to go with the Packers. I just think Aaron Rodgers is too good, and he will not lose to this Bears team.
Yeah, I just can't see it happening either. It's at the end of the day, it's still the Bears, and I don't like them to win. Not against Green Bay.
And now for our last game, the Washington football team versus the Eagles. This was actually a kind of a tough one, but I'm going to go with the Washington football team. Like I've stated with a couple other games, teams competing for playoffs, it's more important to them than teams who aren't. So I just think the Washington football team's defense will kind of bang the quarterback up a little bit with Jalen Hurts. I think they'll get after him a little bit. Now, Hurts has played great, but that Washington football team defense is the one defense I could see stopping him. So I'm going to go with the Washington football team just because they need this win more than the Eagles do.
Yeah, I think, we saw how dominant Washington's defensive line was in week 1 against the Eagles, and their O-line has only gotten in worse shape since then. Now, Jalen is a little more dynamic than Carson Wentz is, but I see them being motivated, and like you said, they have something at stake that's a little greater, and I see them. I honestly, I want them to win. I want Washington to go to the playoffs because I definitely don't want to see Dallas after everything they've been through waste a playoff game. And then you got to hear Cowboys fans like even without Dak and everything else, we made the playoffs. So there's a whole nother layer to that. But I think Washington will do enough, whether it's Alex Smith at quarterback or Heineke, they'll get it done.
Yeah, so now before we wrap this up, we're going to get into college football a little bit. So we're going to be doing 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to be picking from 6 games. And the bottom 4, we're not really going to talk too much about. We're just going to give our picks and why. But for our first game, Ohio State Clemson, I'm like so excited for this game just because it's of the college football playoff. It's the only real game. But Clemson and Ohio State's rivalry is just so exciting just because both these teams legitimately hate each other. Dabo Swinney ranked Ohio State 11th on his rankings, which was just crazy. Now those rankings don't mean anything, and I think it's why he did that. He knows Ohio State is better than the 11th team in the country, and I know he does. He was just doing that to start some stuff. Ryan Day didn't like that too much, but the big thing in this game will be whether or not Ohio State will be able to produce points. We know what Clemson can do. We know Clemson can put up a ton of points, but their defense has been really streaky this year, and Ohio State's offense has been the same way. Earlier in the year, I would say this game is going to be a 48-47 game. It's going to be a high-scoring game. But with the way Ohio State played against Northwestern's defense, Northwestern has a really, really good defense, and Clemson could have a really good defense. But I just don't see Ohio State taking down Clemson. So I'm going to go with Clemson because I think their offense is too good for Ohio State's defense, and I don't think Ohio State will be able to do nearly as much as they were last year. We also will have to see whether or not I'm pretty sure Olave will be back. So getting the quarterback way more weapons than he had before will be really, really crucial for him. Whether or not he will have success, I'm not exactly sure, but I think Fields really, really needs these guys back to have the success that he was having earlier in the year. So I'm going to go with Clemson.
Yeah, man, I think this will be a really exciting game to watch. Honestly, like you said, the other playoff game isn't even, really worth tuning in for. But, honestly, I'd say I want Ohio State more to win than I really think they're going to win, just because last year's game was so exciting and it turned dramatically because of the iffy targeting call on Sean Wade, which we could, talk about all day about, how that's changed the whole landscape of the game and whether that was the right call or not. But, if Justin Fields can flip what he's done in big games so far this year, which obviously is a challenge because he's done it 2 or 3 times this year, but if he plays well, Ohio State is for sure going to make it a great game and can win. With all their weapons, they found a running game, in the Big Ten championship game, which helped a lot. We know how dynamic, Fields can be, on the ground game and even just, breaking out of sacks and extending plays. As long as he improves on his decision-making, I think there's plenty of room to take advantage. I think Clemson's secondary is younger than they have been in the past, which has exposed them a little bit. They're obviously they've had some holes this season just as much as Ohio State has. And like I said, I mean, got my old coach Matt Barnes up there at Ohio State. And after the way things went last year, and Dabo being all disrespectful, it's only right if Ohio State goes up there and wins.
So now for our next game, we cannot make it just pick who's going to win, Alabama or Notre Dame, because I just think that's kind of like obvious. So I'm going to do the point spread, which right now is at 19.5, I believe. I'm taking that. If it was at 30, I would be taking that because we both have stated how we feel about Notre Dame. And Alabama is Alabama. Alabama covers. Alabama does what they always do in big games. So I'm easily taking Alabama in this one. Notre Dame is trying to make themselves kind of like, we've already proved everything. I saw the one quote from Brian Kelly. We don't need to prove anything, but you're in a college football playoff, and that's what your statement is. Instead of saying we're going to go out and win this game, like I don't want to say they're losers, but they kind of are losers. So I'm definitely taking Alabama and the 19 points. Like I said, if it was 30, I just don't believe that Notre Dame defense will be able to stop Alabama's offense at all, and that Alabama defense will be getting after Ian Book a lot. And yeah, I just think Alabama's going to completely dominate this game.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, like you said, I would take that over. I would put it at 30 plus. I mean, we just watched them lose by 20 plus points to Clemson, who essentially sat on their butt the whole second half in the ACC championship game against them, and that was just by them getting Trevor Lawrence back. I mean, that was literally the only difference in the game. And right now, Alabama is a whole nother beast, man. Brian Kelly, the quote, man. I mean, he's a little delusional and kind of honestly, I don't think Notre Dame fans are delusional. I've seen multiple videos of that fans literally they just sank their head when they saw they had to play Alabama because they know what's going to happen. I mean, you don't play for the regular season in college football. You play to win in any sport, actually. You play to win championships. And Notre Dame is a regular season beast, and, I mean, they're just not that in the playoffs. They're in any game of any significance that really matters. They just don't show up. And against the juggernaut of all juggernauts, they're just not at all. And no one's going to have fun watching that. It's going to be easy. Hopefully we're watching Heisman winner Devontae Smith go for another 4 touchdowns. Najee Harris might go for another 5 like he did against Florida. I just would have rather, sat and rewatched the SEC championship than, see the supposed number 4 team in the nation get beat by 50 points.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore. But for our next game, the UNC versus Texas A&M, I'm going to go with Texas A&M. I think this one will be with ease just because UNC's got a lot of guys sitting out because they're declaring for the draft. And some really, really big pieces of their team. We've seen UNC be able to do it all on offense this year. That's what they can do. But taking those guys away, I think will limit their offense. And with Texas A&M and SEC defense, will just be different for them. And Texas A&M, I don't think has many guys sitting out. And they're also going to have something to prove with Notre Dame getting into the playoffs over them, which still frustrates me. So I think Texas A&M will come out here to prove everything. I think Kellen Mond will have his way all game. So I'm going to take Texas A&M.
Yeah, me too, man. I can't go with UNC just because, we saw them lose to Florida State early in the season, and they almost came back. But I mean, there's no excuse for losing to a Florida State team of that caliber, and they lost another game. I'm pretty sure that was bad. Now they looked good against Miami, and they were competitive against Notre Dame. But that kind of sign right there is all you need to know. North Carolina, who lost to Florida State, almost beat Notre Dame. So, and then you're talking about Notre Dame playing Bama. Now Texas A&M didn't look good against Bama either, but if I had to put my money on it, they're going to look a lot better against North Carolina, especially like you said. One of those star running backs is sitting out, and probably some other guys too. Texas A&M is going to be pretty upset about what happened. So, got to take it out on somebody.
For our next game, Ole Miss versus Indiana. This is kind of similar to the North Carolina. Ole Miss has, I I know of two really, really big pieces of their offense sitting out in their starting wide receiver and tight end and Yeboah. But I just think Indiana is a better team than Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin has done pretty well at Ole Miss. I'm not a huge Lane Kiffin fan, but he's done well at Ole Miss. But I think Indiana's defense will be able to get after Matt Corral. Like we kind of saw it with when they played against Ohio State. Fields, Indiana really forced him to make some bad decisions, and I think Fields is a better quarterback than Corral. So I think Indiana will end up taking this one. It'll be tough because they don't have Penix because he's out with an injury, but I'm still going to have to go to Indiana just because the way they've played this year has been one of their best that I've ever seen since I've been alive.
Yeah, I think, everyone knows and watched Indiana have one of the best defenses in college football. And, I mean, they were literally one or two plays away and Penix subsequently getting hurt from them being talked about as Big Ten champions or even talking about, getting a playoff spot, something like that, which you never would have expected. But their team is ridiculously talented. And we saw Ole Miss do some good things this year. They put up some points against Bama, but I see, you mentioned the Ohio State game. I see Indiana's defense forcing a lot of mistakes out of Ole Miss. And, they might score 30, but, if you have 4 turnovers and Indiana scores 55, it doesn't matter. So I see Indiana taking that one.
So for our next game, North Carolina State versus Kentucky, this one's up in the air. It was kind of weird. North Carolina State is the ranked team. Kentucky's not ranked, but Kentucky's still the favorite. That's definitely just because Kentucky's in the SEC and North Carolina State is in the ACC. But I'm going to go with Kentucky. They actually have some guys opting out as well because of to declare for the draft. However, I just think Kentucky's defense will be able to shut down North Carolina State's offense, which they kind of have their way in the ACC. A lot of ACC teams can score a million points on each other, and then when they come into a big bowl game against a good SEC, Big Ten, or a good defense in general, start to struggle. So I'm going to have to go with Kentucky. NC State has been good this year, but I just don't see them beating this Kentucky defense.
Yeah, I mean, last couple of years and really in general, when you see those teams play SEC teams in a bowl game, even average SEC teams, the scores tend to be either closer than you expected or SEC teams, beat a team that you're like, dang, they lost 5-6 games or whatever. But I'm going to go with Kentucky solely because my cousin Boogie plays there. I don't know if he's one of the guys who opted out. He might have. So I don't even know if he's playing or not, but I'm going to go with them just because of the family ties.
So now for our last game, Oregon versus Iowa State. I'm going to go with Iowa State. I think they're going to be kind of playing for more because of kind of the way that they lost that Big 12 championship game and all of that. I just think Iowa State's offense is going to be better than Oregon's defense. If Oregon can put some points up, we definitely could see a high scoring game with a Pac-12 versus a Big 12 team. But I'm going to go with Iowa State just because I think their offense will be a little bit too much for Oregon's defense.
Yeah, man, I think that'll be an exciting game. Like you said, 2 teams from conferences that aren't known for playing defense. And we'll probably see a lot of that. But Oregon, they had 2 really bad losses that I can't believe they had this year. Even with, they had, 2 of their top guys opt out. I still couldn't believe that they really blew their chances early on with a really solid team. But they were opportunistic on defense against USC and did enough on offense and have some guys who can be pretty dynamic. So I'm going to go with Oregon just because of that. I feel like it'll be a good game. I think they'll probably give up a lot just to that really good running back at Iowa State. And, Purdy will probably throw for some, make some big plays in the passing game too. I see a lot of that going both ways. But I think Oregon will make enough plays on defense and produce points on offense.
All right, so that is it for our episode of this week. Thank you guys very much for watching. It was exciting having another interview on this week. And with the NFL draft getting closer and closer, we still have a few months for it. So we're expecting to bring on some guys who are NFL draft prospects throughout the process. So we've been reaching out to some guys. So yeah, it should be exciting. And as I said before, as the NFL season wraps up, we'll definitely be having some guys come on from the NFL just because they've been so busy with all the football stuff. And yeah, we'll definitely have some guys on in the off season. So thank you guys very much for watching, and tune in again next week.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.